to order. Please call the roll.
Bergeron.
Present.
Coos.
Here.
Harris.
Present.
Carlson. Here. Olson.
Here.
Sievertson.
Here.
West.
All right, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, that brings us down to communications, and we've just been talking about the report on the Swan Lake unit that's down, which should be back up, should be back up by March 4th. Fortunately, during peak times. Is it peak times, Dave, that we're going to be running diesel?
Exactly, 5 days a week.
Thank you. We got something from the state's granting permission for the RSA to be conducted on the state grounds. 10-4. That brings us down to persons to be heard. Anybody here? Seeing none, brings us down to finished business. Item 5A, road safety assessment, Federal Highway Administration.
There is a motion.
What is the motion on the table, Madam Clerk?
Motion is to direct the manager to authorize the Federal Highway Administration to undertake a road safety assessment in the city and on the Port of Ketchikan.
All right, and what was the, Dave, what is all the information we were after? I think one of them was concerned that they were going to be doing city streets, and how are they doing city streets? And
That would be at council direction, and what the main thing that was asked staff to find out on is whether or not completion of the RSA would trigger any kind of a timeline for the city to take any action on any deficiencies or corrections that needed to be done. It does not. From what we were told, and Morgan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the main part of it is that deficiencies would need to be addressed by the city for future planning purposes. And I don't remember if there was a length of time that constituted future.
No, the important thing was that you would program the projects in over time. And in general, the scale of projects that I observed in looking over the information available on the FHWA website mostly consisted of like vehicle rails. So that's the kind of scale you're looking at. It's not, from what I understand, it's not very big scale improvements.
Radiuses of corners, signs.
Yeah. It would be, particularly for pedestrian, you're looking at how the intersections work, stuff like that.
anybody else have any questions? Okay, go ahead, Matt.
Clarification, just the area, this is the entire city, or is it just was it just along Tongass? I just forget.
No, it's the airport ferry terminal, the Alaska Marine Highway System ferry terminal, and then the highway adjacent, and then the ports and the public streets adjacent to that. So Water Street, Front Street, Mill Street, Stedman Street, and then some of the roads back in the downtown core, but not getting back into the residential areas or anything like that.
So just out through the Coast Guard base and then down.
I'm not even sure out to the Coast Guard base. It sounded much more limited than that. And out north, not further than Berth 4.
Bob, we got a question.
Would this take in consideration our crossing guard program or anything like that? Would they comment in any way, you think, because we're talking about port and road access?
We'll provide them information on what traffic or what pedestrian control measures we undertake presently. We'll be providing them the Kittleson study and some of the other background information we've compiled over the course of the years.
How about Berth 4? I know that there was a proposed street light there by DOT. Do you think it'll bring that issue back to light?
If they do, we can always protest any of the items in the RSA. Ultimately, they'll produce a report, and we'll be able to comment on it, disagree with it, accept it, disagree with it in total. If we disagree with it in total, and we have a gamut of options available to us.
Thank you, Morgan.
KJ.
If I understood this right, this does not make us liable because of their suggestions. If we don't follow up on them, we have them on a program.
In particular, I think being able to protest any of the make a statement of disagreement on any of the items that they mention, and then programming in the other items, it actually gives us a measure of cover anyways.
Anybody else?
We're probably already liable, right?
Yes. I mean, that'll be for the lawyers to say, but
Yeah.
if something happens on a city street.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
It's Dave's fault.
Thank you, Morgan. Call the roll, please.
Harris,
Aye.
Coos,
Yes.
Severson,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Bergeron.
Abstain.
That passes 5-0 and 1 abstention. Thank you. Brings us down to new business, 6A, comprehensive compensation plan presentation, Ralph Anderson Associates. Do we have somebody from Ralph Anderson Associates here?
You do? Yeah.
Come on down. Introduce yourself, please.
Yes, my name is Doug Johnson. I'm with Vice President with Ralph Anderson and Associates, and I was involved in I've been involved in the ongoing classification compensation work in the original study that was done several years ago. So
Did you want to do a presentation first?
I do. I have
Great.
just like 8 slides to go through that I think will cover some things, if that works.
You betcha.
Okay.
Hit the lights. Seth, can you get
Love
going?
PowerPoints.
Do you?
Live for 'em.
Easy to see.
Did you bring popcorn?
All right. So just a little bit of background in terms of the compensation plan, what you're trying to do. Your main objective of the compensation plan is your ability to recruit and retain. And what you want to do is do that with a structure that provides, consistency with what other employers are doing, fairness in the eyes of the public, fairness in the eyes of the employees, and try and make sure that you have a system of making decisions that it ensures that top decision, because that's really the key as a business, is to recruit and retain employees, but do it in a way that's going to be structured and defensible. And I just highlight that this kind of approach is done in the public sector and the private sector. The private sector maybe has a little bit different approach and tools, but they review their compensation plans and their jobs just like public sector agencies do. So there's 2 things that you do with a class and comp study, and this is what was done several years ago when we were on site. Updating the classification plan, doing that reflects changes in the organization structure. So if you've gone through a growth spurt, or you've added new services, or you built a new recreation center, you have a bunch of new jobs or something like that, it can catch up with that. If you've changed your service delivery model, if you've gone from having specialties in certain areas, and I know in utilities you could have different specialties, if you've gone to something that's more of a combined service delivery and you're not making distinctions between telecom and electric or something like that, then that can influence what the classification plan looks like. And the last thing would be changes in the industry, and that would be evolutions that occur whether or not certain positions are staffed by a full accountant or by an accounting technician, or whether or not you need an engineering tech to do something, or engineering assistant. It does change kind of depending on what other organizations are doing. And jobs evolve. Technology is a big impact on jobs, and hopefully organizations over time are working smarter and figuring out better ways to do things. So that all involves, when you update your classification plan, all you're doing is catching up with the manner in which work is structured and the manner in which you deliver your services. And then when you do a compensation update, you take that a step further. One is you could revisit your policies, which I'm going to circle back to, but the key thing here is make sure that you are somehow tied to the marketplace, that you have some survey data or benchmarks that you can use to be able to meet your objective of recruitment and retention. And so that's the reason for doing market surveys. And then secondarily, you look at internal equities. You make sure that you have equity across positions in the organization. Now, I didn't bring a chart that kind of goes into that in depth, but I think most of you realize that market equity and internal equity sometimes are different perspectives. And if you want to get into the classic age-old debate of what planners are paid versus engineers, you can go with the market value, which means engineers are typically paid higher than planners. I've worked with a few organizations that say, no, we want them equitable. They have 4-year degrees, they do similar scope and impact of projects, and so we're going to force them to be equal. So you have to make a choice sometimes as to whether or not you want to adopt with the market values in jobs, or whether you want to do something that's a little bit more internally structured and based on the values you have in the organization. So those 2 things are driven by your compensation policies, which I'm going to jump into here. So one compensation policy, who do you compare with? So when we did the survey last time, we established a set of cities in Alaska. We actually touched the Oregon and Washington market as well. We made sure we got some specialty organizations to cover some of the services that you have that are unique. And there's that process of essentially setting up a marketplace that you're going to compare to. And that's a policy decision of the organization. And it's one, frankly, that can be revisited over time. So what you did 5 or 10 years ago, maybe the context, maybe things have changed, and you have a different set of philosophies. Maybe you need to be more aggressive in who you compare to. If you're having great difficulty getting certain jobs here, one option is to expand or look at a different set of market agencies that better fits where you're needing to draw people from. The second important piece would be market position, and that's where you want to rank within that market. So if you survey a dozen organizations, do you want to be one of the top 3? Do you want to be at the bottom 3 or somewhere in the middle? And you can change that anchoring point based on your ability as an organization to pay and on the need to be able to recruit and retain employees. And for the most part, you want that to be uniform across the organization, meaning you don't want to say that for this job it's going to be the 70th percentile and for this job it's going to be the 30th percentile. You want some consistency across the organization. And that, frankly, doesn't match sometimes the need for hiring certain positions that you have difficulty recruiting. And so it is possible in some organizations to be able to have a stipend or some sort of extra amount because of the reality of not being able to recruit. And I don't know if you have that example here, but the best example I can give that I've come across in 20 years is organizations that do surveys for public safety dispatch or police dispatch. And no matter what they pay in the marketplace, they still need to pay more, or what they measure in the marketplace, they'll adopt a policy that actually pays a lot more than that because they need to be able to recruit those positions in. So you have to ultimately meet your business need as an organization. You just try and do it without creating inconsistency or inequity within the organization. And then the other 3 that I'm just touching on quickly is you can choose between putting more dollars in benefits versus base salary. That's an organization, maybe workforce preference. Obviously, there is some level of competition in terms of what other agencies are doing, but that's a choice in terms of how competitive you want to be on those 2 sides of the equation. The balance of internal and external equity, whether you choose to establish values primarily based on internal values versus market. And the last thing, pay delivery methods, is your pay range. You have a pretty long pay range and a lot of steps, and that type of progression is something that builds in retention mechanisms. You also have the ability to flexibly hire somewhere within the range. And one of the questions I think that came forward was certain positions that you're having to hire at the top of the range in order to be able to bring people in. And that's something that, if that's consistently happening, it may be time to do a market survey and see whether or not that's a mechanism that's uniform across the city or whether that's something that's unique to that particular job. So I just wanted to highlight the agencies that we used last time in the survey. It's a pretty comprehensive group of organizations that we surveyed. And the objective here is to cover a couple different primary points in the marketplace. One is to cover your backyard. So you want to look at organizations that are going to be geographically close to you. And the other important objective is to look at organizations that have similar services. So that would be a reason to be using some different organizations. Size can be a factor. So if you have only a choice of small cities or large cities that are 10 times your size, then it may be better to go beyond the immediate geographic region and look at some other cities, because at least that will give you some idea of what similar size organizations have in terms of management jobs and certain professional and other types of jobs. So that was the market we used last time. Now, compensation adjustments kind of come in 3 flavors. There's more, but I'm kind of basing it into 3 categories tonight. The first one is how you allocate positions. And this literally means an employee. A position is an employee, like a single position, not the employee themselves, not their performance, not them in terms of an individual, but the position that they occupy. And so if you look at your budget, you have FTEs, right? Full-time equivalents or total staff, and that's what positions are. So one thing that you look at is how those duties are assigned, and that can evolve and change. When you change managers, when you change organization structure or service delivery, how positions are allocated and essentially deployed in the organization is something that can change over time. Existing classifications, you have an existing set of job classifications, job titles, job descriptions. So that's something that you have to work within. Sometimes you grow a new service area, and so it's time to create a new classification. Creation of new job classifications is something that organizations will do over time based on a number of characteristics, either organizationally based or market-based, or some new higher function in way in which the positions are organized. departments have discretion in terms of how they allocate positions. And there was one example that I think in the questions and some of the things that we've reviewed, and that's where when you get a vacancy in the organization, sometimes it makes sense to pull back and say, well, we've always had an inspector do this role. But if we take a step back, if we have a senior engineering technician do it, we can have that position do broader types of responsibilities. We can give them more duties or differentiate the duties or allocate the position in a way where it's a more efficient position and that it better meets the work demands and service delivery model of the department. And so in that type of instance, particularly when there's a vacancy, I would say that there's a lot of discretion on the part of your managers, your department heads ultimately, to make those kinds of judgments and be able to decide what level that position can be assigned to. And as long as the incumbent is meeting the qualification requirements of the job, there's no issue with doing that. So it's arguably you could have an organization where you have an engineering tech do something and over time it becomes an engineering assistant or an engineer just because of the nature of the work and your ability to leverage that position in doing other things. And that's different than the next bullet down, which is a reclassification. And that's where a position evolves to the point where either the type of duties that it's doing, the responsibility level, or the qualifications have grown beyond how the job was previously defined and classified. So a reclassification would be either reclassifying that position to something different in terms of job title and function, or creating a new classification to move that position into. And then last thing would be a pay range assignment, and that's completely absent any changes in organization structure or assignment of duties or allocation of duties or the deployment of resources. That just reflects basically two things. First would be market data that indicates the job should be paid higher. Second would be internal equity analysis, looking at knowledge, skills, and abilities and qualifications. And if that is something that's changed or evolved, that can be something that you look at. And then the other would be more of a compaction or assessment of the hierarchy, making sure that if a job, you could have a job that functionally is the same, but has a new direct report, and that could be something that alters where that position is in the organization. And I'm going to break that down a little bit more in the next slide. So when you get into maintenance mode, incremental changes are normal. And I know that it's frustrating sometimes to go through a process, we get everything cleaned up in a citywide classification and compensation study, and then 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months later, there's an issue that's brought forward. And that's because you guys are in business of providing municipal services, and things evolve and change. So incremental changes are very normal. And what you've done in your process is you have a department head that's involved in the process, you have HR staff that's involved in the process, and I think many, most, if not all of these end up looping through our office, and we do a review. And one of the things that we look at is not only are we talking to the incumbent and the manager and looking at the context of the situation of the problem, is that we want to make sure that we don't isolate and look at one position that's really an issue that covers a whole job family. So we wouldn't want to look at, if you had 10 administrative assistants in the city, we wouldn't want to look at one and elevate it without getting some context of looking at the other 9 that exist. Unless it's something that's a very clear, we're changing this job or replacing this administrative assistant with something that's a finance officer or something, or a management analyst, or something that's a very different type of job. And in that type of instance, it's almost like a budget decision, that you're essentially eliminating one position, creating a new position, and you're just using that incumbent and placing them in that new level. And again, it becomes an issue for the organization and the manager to demonstrate that the incumbent has the requisite skills and qualifications to be able to do that. So we want to make sure that we don't survey single jobs or do analysis that's out of the context of job families. And that's why in the decisions that we've, I guess, looked at in the years, we've not done an isolated market survey and made adjustments that would ignore the fact that there could be widespread inequities compared to the market in the organization. There are times when we can look at that, but we typically, even though we don't realize it, if we're looking at one job, we may get another couple of benchmarks just to see whether or not we want to validate whether or not this job has gotten further behind market than other kind of key related jobs in the organization. And multiple position classes, again, we don't want to look at one isolated admin assistant and ignore the other 9. We want to make sure that we're at least looking at those, asking questions, finding out whether or not there's anything that would be more of a uniform change for the whole entire job classification. So single position job classes, those are a lot easier to look at, and that's, I think, many of the issues that we've looked at have been those, where there's one incumbent, one job title, And over time, there's new duties, higher qualifications, there's vacancies, you get new incumbents in. It can kind of remold and change the job. And as long as you're looking at it and putting it in the right context and making sure that we're not creating inequities, there's no problem with doing those kind of ad hoc, incremental types of adjustments. Having said all of that, organizations will typically update and do some sort of citywide or organization-wide review every 5 or 8 years. It kind of depends on how much you've grown, what changes you have in terms of, again, the service delivery, the types of services you provide, any kind of new services or new things that you do in the organization. And there's various ways to do that. We do a lot of limited class and comp studies where we're basically focusing on changes and issues. And so instead of casting a net that has every single employee filling out a questionnaire and doing what we did last time, which was a high interview rate, 80% or 85% of the employees interviewed, what we can do is through our discussions with the management team and targeting into issues, we can have questionnaires and interviews that are done on a much smaller scale, that aren't going to target those jobs that everybody recognizes haven't changed, but target those areas where there may be some issues. And that's simply a matter of getting the positions equated correctly with the job classifications and making sure that job descriptions are up to date. So that type of process typically does result in a review of every job description, but there's many jobs that you have in the organization that a very cursory look can validate that there hasn't been some huge changes. Or to the degree there are changes, it's not the way the job is defined, it's going to that third bullet of how it compares in the marketplace. So doing a market survey of benchmarks, focusing on areas where you have had recruitment and retention issues, gives us the ability to see, is this a citywide problem? Is every job 10% behind market, or is there only a handful of jobs that are 10% behind market, which is validating, hopefully, areas where you're having recruitment and retention types of issues. And then we can do an internal alignment review, and then you can go through a prioritized implementation so you can kind of balance the cost of that. So I'm not saying, I'm not throwing this out there in terms of pushing into doing this, but the kinds of questions that I received prior to coming out and knowing the history of the organization and some of the issues we've looked at, eventually you're going to need to do something like this, something that's a broader type of analysis in order to validate and make sure that there hasn't been inequities in the organization that are created as you go through this ad hoc process. Even though we go out of our way to make sure that we don't create those sorts of things, they can still crop up despite our best efforts and despite the best efforts of your organization in managing that. So I think that kind of covers, like, just in terms of broad terms, the type of questions. I could go through the specific questions that I received, because I do have copies of those here, but I think that's just in terms of process where you're at, that if there's lots of questions that are out there about whether or not we're creating inequities or whether or not we have processes that are fair, I know that I can say without just common type of issue is that sometimes when you get a position that's gone through a reclass request and it's been denied, and maybe in 5 years it's been denied 2 or 3 times, loud voices can create those kinds of equity concerns. And that doesn't mean that they're valid, but it doesn't mean that we should ignore that there are potentially some issues there that looked at in a broader context might have some validity to them. So sometimes when we're looking at a single position class and the information we're getting, we're looking at what are the new duties, what are the new responsibilities, what are the qualification requirements, and if none of those things have changed, then there's really no reason to change the job classification or reassign it to a higher range. And again, we're not talking about market survey data that says that a job has gotten behind the market value. We're simply talking about how a job is defined and what the role and responsibility is in an organization. The second thing is that sometimes what we get is really an organizational change. So if somebody were to say, we want to change this analyst to an assistant director, okay, my response to that would be very careful, make sure that you're validating that through your budget process, and that the manager or director in that instance is saying, this is the reason why we want to take this FTE and we want to change it from this old position to an assistant director, because it'll give us X, Y, Z, because I'm going to retire in 2 or 3 years and we want to be able to grow somebody into my role. There could be a number of reasons to do that, but in that instance, I'm taking specific direction about an organizational change and simply reflecting that in the reclassification. I'm not necessarily second guessing whether or not this organization needs an assistant director. And our role in that type of analysis is to at least throw back to the organization and double check with your HR staff or the director, hey, this is an organizational restructuring. Has this been approved? Is the city manager in the loop? Are there any issues with respect to how this is created, and we don't want you to subvert or go around your budget process. So we do get those kinds of issues sometimes. We're pretty good at being able to push back and make sure that it's not something that's being done in a manner that we're reorganizing inadvertently through a reclassification type of process. So that should give you an overview, and if you want me to go through questions, I can, or if you want to just ask questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Bob, do you want to ask the questions? Or
Yeah, I would like to ask a question.
Okay.
Bob Severson, I worked for the city for 38 years and was under this compensation plan when it was done. My concerns are, as a council, we get bits and pieces, people, positions, whatever, coming, and we're doing these spot raises. And a lot of times those spot raises are to meet market value and not a change in job duties. And so then what we start doing, I see, is the plan becomes unbalanced. Because the market value has increased, we have stable employment down here because the job situation is catch-can. They're not going to go look for something else. But are they paid to the same standard if you use the comparison like you did when you began? Probably not. But what happens is, I think closer to the top you are, the more likely that they're being reviewed, because you have professional employees, you have the engineering department, the telephone department are the two that come to mind. We cannot hire CAD operators, we can't hire engineers at the structured rate that we have without going all the way to R, hire them in, they have no place to go.
Right.
And then what happens, and we've done this, is we have quality employees that they don't get an increase for 4 years, 5 years. And there's a market out there that they could probably go to. So then what we do is we create a different position to bump them up and get them more money to keep them. And again, it doesn't address the whole plan issue. Now the plan just starts to go, it doesn't make any sense to me anymore. We're not doing it based on really a change in qualifications. We're doing it on getting employees more money, because I think we're paying under market. And that's why we have trouble recruiting. We can't hire professionals. We can't hire, I mean, police officers. You know, the wage scale overall is not what we're seeing on a competitive market.
Yeah, and the only way to validate that is to do a broader compensation survey. And 5 years is a long time to go without doing one of those. So, you know, I hear what you're saying, and I think there is, on the one hand, a need to be ad hoc, responsive to issues that you have real time, but it becomes time sooner or later to do that broader analysis and make sure you can find out, is this something that affects all jobs, or is it isolated pockets that need to be addressed, and get market data to be able to validate that?
And so here's the other problem. We don't want to pay more money. And so we pay the little places where we have to, but we don't adjust the whole process across the board, and that's unfair to other employees. So I don't know what the answer is here, but I see that the problem continues to grow. The ranges continue to expand out like this. We keep reclassifying these upper jobs to try to get people in or get more money, and yet this stays down here. So the plan is not equitable anymore within. Like you said, there's one where it's the inner equity of the plan.
Yeah.
So you keep everybody at a low rate and do what you can do, or do you build that disparity into a plan?
Yeah, I think, again, you get data to find out how big of an issue it is, whether you have a real problem or a perception of a problem, and then you use that data to be able to, in a structured way, address it. That's really the only thing you can do if there's a lot of those kinds of questions. There's nothing wrong with doing the incremental maintenance. I think that's normal, and I appreciate the fact that if you're raising these concerns, you know, my honest, candid response is then it's probably time to get a broader survey and find out. And that can be done in a number of ways. It doesn't have to be a big study. But getting data to be able to validate whether or not there's, again, a widespread issue or not, and then you can determine how you want to progress and implement from there.
And then the other issue that you brought up that we don't tend to do, I guess, is we take a certain classification, administrative assistants or something like that. We raise this one, but not this one, and this one over here, and then maybe a little bit on this one over here. So then, not only are we building disparity in the plan, we're creating a lot of hard feelings within the family. This doesn't work well. People know how they're rated against people around the room or the table or whatever. And when they see this happening, we get disgruntled employees. And why them and not me? I'm doing just as much, or I'm working just as hard, or they've added more work to me. Why is my position not reviewed? So I see that we have some relevant problems here, and I might agree that we probably need to do a reevaluation of that. But again, then it comes down to the local economy and what do we do for dollars?
Right. One quick response on that. I know that when we look at those issues, we're very careful about making sure we're not, again, taking one job and moving it or changing it in a way that's going to create that inequity across the board. Having said that, we don't always hear the kinds of comments or feedback that you're providing. And I'll just want to say that if we're doing a reclass and it results in something that creates that kind of questioning by peer types of positions, we're happy to write a response or make sure that we're capturing that, because I know we look at it, and it may be that in the way that the memo is written in terms of this one position, that doesn't always come through, but we're happy to talk to those employees or be able to write a memo that addresses their specific concern to make sure of that. In the absence of hearing about it, though, we don't always know that that's an issue that the organization feels, and at least that gives you some ability to say, okay, the consultant didn't ignore that. Here's X, Y, and Z reasons why this position is like this, and why this position hasn't changed and remains in the same classification. That doesn't address survey data, it just addresses the retooling, reclassification aspects of the plan.
And as a council member, I would like to know how I should be viewing these things when they come before me in the table, because I am concerned about imbalance. I'm concerned that we're doing the right thing for the plan and for the employees and for the city. And we have, I don't know, what do we have? 5 different unions. It gets all boggled up in represented and non-represented employees, professional employees, confidential employees. There's a lot of things that we have to look at, and so sometimes with the information that we're given, I don't know if we're the best judges, if that's the correct way to roll with that.
Well, I do know the people that look at these positions in our office were involved in the original study. I think we have one analyst in our office, Jeff, who's been one of the folks that's looked at these most often, and when he does his analysis, I'm the one who looks at it, and I look at it like you do. I hope that's my desire, is to look at it critically and make sure that we are at least second-guessing and making sure that we're not creating those kinds of inequities. It doesn't mean that it's perfect, but we do look at it from that perspective, and as I said, if there are issues that it creates, we're happy to look into that further.
Yeah, I got a couple questions. Well, one thing Bob's brought up about the, that I guess we're guilty of the single position and instead of working in the family situation, and I think that has been a problem we've faced in the last year. The other thing is he brought up, in the telecommunication, we're always trying to hire somebody, and we're way, according to management, we're way out of market compared to what these guys are getting attracted to, jobs down south. And I see, we keep advertising, and I mean, we've taken over a year, I think, to fill some positions. And so I'm sort of interested in a limited review. You're talking about limited class, and maybe look and highlight some certain areas that we, engineering or especially telecommunication, and see what kind of market or what's the market rate going now. Right now we just sort of change the rate or try and entice somebody, or the management comes and says, hey, we have to offer them this, which I don't mind doing. I mean, it keeps the, last time we did that comm plan, it cost us $2 million, not for you to do it, but in increases and everything. So at this point in time, I can't see us affording to redo the whole comp plan and try to absorb that again in the near future. But in certain areas, and I understand where Bob's talking about where guys top out too, those are kind of the things that have come to us at this council and what we're trying to deal with. So.
Have you had across-the-board increases in the last 4 years, or is it just range steps moving to R?
We have steps. We've had, we've had negotiated raises.
Okay.
And then we try to pass on negotiated raises to the non-representative. So, but go ahead.
One of the problems too is we have these IBW contracts. We have linemen. Linemen pretty much write their own ticket.
They do.
The nature of the industry.
Yeah.
You guys can do that. What they like about working for a utility is they get to stay home and raise their family and have them in a single school type stuff. But, so you go into negotiations, and you're more or less forced into this market over here to keep them. And it's, it's regular negotiations back and forth. But then you come to like the general government, and they don't have the same professional. I mean, you can probably hire another laborer off the street, or you can train another truck driver. So it doesn't raise equity. So now, between the two, where we tried at one point to get these guys closer in some kind of range, but you have similar duties on one side, like in the water department and the sewer job and stuff like that. But now they're going like this again. And so we're going to be right back to where we were before, with this plan being cattywampus. And the adjustment would be dramatic to try to bring this one up, because you're never going to bring this one down. It's just the way it works. And so there's some real complex issues here that over a period of time I think we're going to have to deal with to stay in the market and keep a healthy workforce.
How much is a limited comp review cost?
Well, it depends on whether you want, there's a number of factors. I'm spitballing here. Whether you need to review all the positions and job classifications in some targeted manner. Most times when you do that, it's a question of whether there's on-site interviews, whether it's just questionnaires, whether there's phone type of discussion. Pulling back, a market survey that covers key benchmarks in these areas that you're talking about where you can't be competitive is a much smaller scale type of analysis.
That's more what I was thinking.
Yeah, and that's something that if it's base salary, depending on the number of job titles, and I'm forgetting all the exact market agencies, it could be anywhere from 15 to 25,000, depending on how that's scoped, but a much smaller cost than what the last project was. Most of that effort was looking at every position, spending a lot of time on site, checking positions, and going through that. So doing a survey, particularly just base salary, if it's total compensation, it might be another 5,000 or 8,000 on top of that to be able to get some benefits in that type of information. And we would just have to work with the organization to figure out how many benchmarks and assume it's the same market. But when you talk about competing with employers down south, were those ones that were looked at last time? Do we need to look at additional employers or retool the market a little bit to fit who you're competing with? And that would be something that would have to be looked at as well.
Go ahead, Bob. Marie, have you seen a drastic request for change in job descriptions overall when you when you look at our workforce?
Have we done a lot of updating to jobs?
Yeah, has there been a request for a lot of that?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think that a lot of the stuff that we've done has changed. I think we've got new equipment and we're doing a few things there, but overall I think that the job descriptions and the jobs that are doing are pretty stable.
Yeah, very, very few requests for job description changes.
Yeah, so we wouldn't be in for a lot of interviews, I think, to basically change those. If there are those individual ones that we think that job duties have changed, they've added something to them, or technology changed where they got to do something more, I can understand that.
As far as I know, all of our job descriptions should be current because we should be dealing with them on a regular basis. If our department heads feel that the job description is outdated, we should have already dealt with them. So our job descriptions should be very current. And really the only thing that Ralph Anderson and his associates should have to do would be the market study.
Thank you, Rick.
Now, if you did the market study, could we limit you to certain areas, or would that be for the whole group, and we're not talking about job descriptions and all that if we're just doing a market study? Because it'd be interesting to see what the market is. I can't guarantee you we'd want to move everybody up to the market, but
yeah, I think it's, given the types of questions, I think we'd want to do a fairly comprehensive review of different departments and sections and job families, but it would be a benchmarking approach. So we'll still be able to get, you could take 15, 20 jobs in an organization, and those 15 or 20 can give you a fairly good idea overall where you're at, and then it's all these specialties that you would extend off of that. I mean, I think the last survey was probably 70 or 80 job titles or something like that.
when was that comp plan fully done? What year was that?
2008.
Oh, I was going to say 2007. I was close. Yeah. 5 years.
So we're at the 5-year mark.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you haven't done a market survey, that'll tell you whether or not linemen and, sewer water workers, whether the market reflects that difference or whether you've just had to pay more for a lineman in order to be able to recruit them. But that is a job that in the marketplace is higher than a lot of other skilled trades. It's just the way it is.
Any other questions? Matt?
Yeah, I've got a few. First one is, so I got the first one. We've got about 80 positions roughly in the city. Is that what you said?
No, I was thinking 80 job titles that we surveyed.
That you surveyed.
Yeah.
How many positions are there in our compensation? I don't mean how many employees, but how many positions. Yeah.
I'm thinking there's about 175 job titles.
And in those 5 years, the council's done adjustment to 3.
No, there have been more than that. I'm gonna give you a number of about 15 is what I think. I mean, and that might be on the high side.
So,
But keep in mind that not every position that has gone through a job description change has come to you. The only positions that come to you are those that have some type of grade change.
well, let me ask the question better. How many times have we messed with the system? The council, not
The council?
the council. You guys, HR, Ralph Anderson, the process following, I understand, but how many times have we, because we're up here saying that's broken, and my attitude is we're the ones that are the only cause of that. So how many times have we done that? 4, roughly?
Yeah, maybe 4. I mean, off the top of my head.
Well, management is the one that keeps telling us we're needing to change because we're under market.
Well, there have been other instances.
Okay.
And then the other, what was the council's position on market position when we did this 5 years ago? Did we want to be high, middle, low?
Medium.
Medium. Okay. And then when we evaluated the positions and defined them for compensation, did we look at highest skills that the job was going to do, or do we say the job skills that they're going to do most often? Does that make sense? Are we looking at if you're expected to perform a job up here at this level, but 85% of your time is spent here at this level, did we pay them at the highest level, or were they mostly did?
In my opinion, it was a mixture.
Right. It would be a mixture.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Lou, this is Dick.
Go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, I got a couple of comments, and maybe they're questions too, but I guess the first comment is that we may not get the top-rated type people all the time, even though we're trying to pay them, but this is a small town, and the economy's not the best, and the city's pay is really not that bad. You could find a lot of people that would like to work for us at the pay scales we pay, depending upon what the skill levels are. So I think, we're challenged with how do we try to fight down south high prices, high wages, and yet we're a small community that really don't want to start jacking up taxes to cover all this. And then the other comment I'd have is that one of our issues here recently has been, I don't know what you want to call it, administrative assistants, just assistants in general, but they got lumped. And in my experience, having worked for the federal government for a long time and looking at assistants and positions and working with position descriptions, well, my observation is all assistant positions are not created equal. The skill levels are different, especially if they're in different departments. If they're all in the same department, it may be one issue, but if they're in different departments, their skill levels, educational levels, a whole bunch of things that make them different. And I'm not saying what the pay scale is yet, but a lot of it depends to me upon how well they're written. And then the key thing is whoever's in the position actually performing according to position description, because if they're not, then there's a problem. And it's a supervisory problem then. But we talked about these, quote, lumped together administrative positions, administrative assistants. And like I say, to me, they're not created equal. How we're going to solve that problem, I don't know yet. the last comment I've got right now is that we're talking about pay and how can we compete, and right now I'm hearing too many rumors, and I can't confirm them because we don't have any way or haven't requested any access to, I'll say, how people are getting step increases, but I hear too many rumors of 2-step increases annually because we're trying to keep their wages jacked up. And if an employee is working to deserve a 2-step level increase and walking on water, hey, great. But if it's just to keep the wages up, then we got a problem. And those are some policy problems and some other things. I don't know how we work on, but we got to think about them. Thanks.
Thanks, Dick. Marie, are we giving 2-step increases?
Yes, we do give out 2-step increases, but they are not common. And the department head will have to, or normally has to, have a reason for the 2-step increase. It's just not automatic. Now, you do have an automatic system built into the general government IBEW contract, but as far as other positions, I would say on average you do, or the city does, 7 to 8 2-step increases annually for employees.
7 to 8?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not a lot.
Is that more apt in single departments or over across the board? Is it scattered all over the place?
It's scattered all over.
Thank you. Matt?
Here's one more question. If you happen to know this, what's the average change in public sector salaries since 2008?
Well, the last 4 or 5 years has not been a lot. So it depends on the markets. It depends on revenues, obviously. But in the economy that we've been in, there's been a lot of organizations that have done no COLAs, and some of them have even done furloughs. Some of them have done tape hacks, mostly in benefits. So there hasn't been a lot of change. I think the interesting thing is, as organizations come out of the economy, and I want to emphasize that you, in your local economy, which I haven't surveyed in 5 years, could run very different than a Seattle or a Portland or a Sacramento type of economy, partly because of the tourism aspect. And so it's a question that kind of comes back in terms of state funding, local funding, and all those kinds of things, and how that affects the job market, what your unemployment rate is, and so forth. But there hasn't been huge increases. It's been on the order of 0 to 2%, 3% at the most, over the last several years incrementally. So, maybe in the last 5 years, wages have increased 5 or 6%, somewhere in that realm.
Another problem we have, Doug, is the fact that, I don't know if we're the only utility, public-owned telephone, but we're darn close to it.
One of the few, yes.
One of the few, and so we're really competing with a corporation market out there in the telecommunications business, and quite honestly, I don't know if we can. Wage issue.
Right.
Because of, in the fields, they give different types of bonuses and awards and stuff, which normally a municipality wouldn't be doing. So when we talk about these wage packages and attracting professionals out of that field, we're at a disadvantage. I mean, at some point, we're just going to say, this is all we can do, and whether we contract those services or whatever we do with them, because I just don't see how we can keep up with it. So that's an interesting egg that you got to...
It's unique, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an industry, by the way, that is still very, very competitive. So, in any market you go to. So, if you're going to provide those services, you have to get the skills, and you either have to grow them in-house. So one option is to have a very deep kind of mentoring, training, extra staff basically to work up through and train them in-house. And if they live local and they want to stay local, so either grow your own or you have to pay what the market rates are to attract them. Those are your only two choices when you're in a unique service area like that.
So because of the economy, this might be the good time to look at the limited comp review?
Yeah, it is. I mean, frankly, it is, because 2 or 3, 4 years from now, things can change dramatically, and it becomes a little bit. So now you're really able to focus on the equity types of issues. I mean, your baseline survey maybe you're off market a little bit, but you have a lot of discretion as an organization in given your recruitment retention goals and that sort of thing. And where you want to look for is those that are beyond the norm. So we can do a norming analysis where you say, well, here's where the city is in general, and here's the 20 or 10 or 5 jobs that are exponentially more behind market than others, and you need to look at and be attentive to in order to meet your recruitment and retention objectives.
I think some of that information would be useful, and I don't know if the whole council would be interested in doing something like that, but you can talk, Matt.
No.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Bob.
So what do we need at this point? Do we need to give the manager's office direction? Do we need to ask him to go out and get a request for what this work's going to do and bring it back to the council?
Well, I think if we're interested in doing, looking at something like this, we should put it on the agenda of a next meeting or the meeting after. It might be closed already, and then do it in public, talk about it, make a decision, go forward.
Well, I think we should make a motion to put that on the next agenda.
Is it too late? Well, let's do it the second
One
meeting.
after.
Yeah, we'll do it for the
we got
21st.
time. I just
Okay, well, let's then. The motion is to put on a limited class comp study. Is that the way I'd say it?
Motion or correction.
get a proposal based on our discussion.
I can get you a proposal with options and things to be able to consider.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, something for us to consider. Okay, at the second meeting in March.
I'll be out of town yet, so but that
All right, first meeting in April.
that works.
First
Second-
meeting in April.
Second weekend in April. First week work for you? Okay.
Okay, so we'll shoot for this on the agenda of the first meeting in April. And are we giving direction or are we making a motion?
I don't think we need to make. a
No, I
motion.
think
We
this
can
is.
make direction.
Okay. And we'll look at, I'm at the limited class and conversation, we can see what the cost is, we can get an idea of what you'd be doing, especially the comparisons of some, there's certain jobs we should look at to see how we relate in the market, and if we can even compete, or if we want to compete, with the way the market is right now, or the economy is right now. I don't know if we have much money to, increase much of anything, but, this might be a good time to look at some of our concerns.
I have another question. I know that we have what are considered benchmark positions. When one of those are raised, how do you address that when it's a benchmark for a number of positions?
You would typically move all the positions that are tied to that benchmark. So there's equity ties to benchmarks, and if you're going to move one, then you would try and move all the others. There could be a few exceptions to that, but that would be the normal rule.
Have we done any benchmark positions? Marie?
I don't believe we've increased any benchmark positions. I know that when you increase, let's say, a assistant department head position, because we have that rule of 10 to 15% between positions, it might affect a position underneath it, and it has, but I don't
That's not a
believe.
benchmark, right?
Yeah, that's not a benchmark. I don't believe we've changed the rate or increased the grade for any benchmark position.
Can we find out what the benchmark positions are? Is that,
Yes, I'll provide that.
or is that something that generally you don't?
So Doug, listening to us, you have an idea what our concerns are?
I do. Good discussion.
Do you have any questions for us?
No?
Okay. Anybody else? Doug, we want to thank you for coming up. I know it was a little different and everything. Oh, Dan?
Yeah, I just, this is going to be a really difficult discussion, as it progresses into the future, and I just really want to encourage the community to give us feedback on this. We've had budgeting issues that were really difficult, but then we have positions that we advertise at a certain level, only to have someone come back and say, after they're offered the job, now I want this much. And at some point, where do you draw the line? The line has to be drawn somewhere that we only have so much money to spend. And if we need more, it's going to have to come out of everyone's pockets, with higher taxes, higher rates for services, however you do it. And it's not popular to say this, but at some point, we have to be realistic.
That's they elected us, that's our job. We make
Yes.
them mark.
I have a question.
You bet,
I
KJ.
don't know if it's a question or a comment. Aside from money that we offer, for whatever positions, Shouldn't we be marketing the fact that you're moving to Ketchikan and there ain't no bank robberies, there are very few murders there? I mean, this is a great place, weather exceptions. It's a great place to live, and if you're coming from a big city or something like that, you might just want to consider the small town of Ketchikan and what that value is in your wage. Does that make any sense?
Not all think that way, unfortunately.
Well, I understand everybody wants the money, but
We understand. Good comment. Anybody else? Doug, thank you very much. I guess we'll be seeing more of you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
All
you
right.
for coming.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us down to mayors and council comments. Dick, you can be first.
Yep, really no comment, guys. I'll be back in a couple of days.
10-4. Sam. Dan. Matt.
No, sir.
Bob.
I just came back from Juneau, and Deanne, sound like you were there. I heard the same story.
No.
I don't want to know about that.
I do.
KJ.
No, thank you.
I have nothing. Everybody, thank you for coming out. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Thursday, regular meeting. We're adjourned.